Welcome everyone to another episode of Dynamics Corner. Brad, I need to build something. What's the best approach? I'm your co-host, Kris.
And this is Brad. This episode was recorded on January 10th, 2025. Kris. You build things? I didn't know you build things.
IKEA tables?
But that is a good question because within Business Central, did you know that you could use assembly orders and production orders? And with us today, we had the opportunity to learn the differences between production orders and assembly orders and when you may want to use either one of those. With us today, we had the opportunity to speak with Jenn Claridge.
Hello.
Happy
Hello,
New
good
Year.
morning.
How are things?
Excellent. How about yourself?
I'm good. Happy New Year.
You celebrate New Year's up there?
That is a common one. Yes, but I also do not really know the origin of that.
Of New Year's. The Canadian New Year?
Just in general. No idea. Don't have any clue. No.
I have
Did you
a
guys do
little
anything
clue,
fun?
and my clue
Oh, do you?
is that it's a new year.
Well, that, I guess, but who formalized it? And when did they do that? And where did it start? Tell me more, Brad.
Chris.
I'm thirsty for the
Chris.
knowledge.
Chris, help. Those are good questions.
Help us.
But the other thing, in honor of this conversation, we made it feel like
We're paying
Canada.
honor.
We made it feel like Canada down here
Oh.
because
it's
it
freezing?
is so cold.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
Yeah, you're just not leaving your home at any point.
I literally
purchased
didn't. I'm embarrassed to say, but I didn't leave for the past 2 days. Wait, no, I did go out yesterday for a little bit. Earlier in the week, yeah, forget it. Take that back.
I am contemplating my whole life at this point because there's lots of times because I work from home that I don't leave for 4 days or 5 days. So I'm now worried. Is glorophobia coming into play? Am I what's happening? Because if 2 days is a lot,
Well,
Don't you get excited though on the weekends? So you come around the weekend, you have to get out of the house. I force my family to get out of the house because
define leaving the
Yeah.
house. Define leaving the house. When you say leaving the house, I mean literally stepping outside. Because there are times where I'll go an entire week where I don't leave my property, but I do
Right,
spend a lot of
okay.
time outside. So I'm at least getting the sunshine, fresh air, and I'll do
Right.
yard stuff, or I go running or walking or such. Well, I guess running
Dude.
leaves my property, but I'm saying physically not getting in the. See, it's all.
I
political.
leave. We
It's
literally
tricky.
go somewhere. We go somewhere because it's I'm
Yeah.
here 5 days a week. I need to get out, and then we would
Mhm.
either go to the next town over or find something like a little tiny museum, whatever that is, just
an
to get out of the
activity.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do
Yeah.
need those activities like the small town visits or doing something to step away. But not leaving the house during the week for me is very common because it is a challenge working from home because you get up, you do your
Mhm.
routine or whatever it may be, you work. Then at the end of the day, it gets dark now because it's winter. And even down here,
Oh,
it gets
yeah.
dark. Not as early as you northerners, but when I'm here,
Yeah. 4:30. It's
you
dark.
go to work basically in the dark.
Yes.
You come home in the
Yes.
dark. Not quite as bad as say Alaska, but it's true. At the end of the day, I find that around my 3:30, 4 o'clock meetings, it's the sun is going down. So by the end of the call at 5 o'clock, I have a little candle lit to be okay, well, let's circle back next week.
Is that what you
But-
have in Canada? Just candles?
No, just for energy efficiencies and things. But it's it gets progressively darker, but you're meeting to meeting. So you haven't taken the time to just even go flick on a light so that when
yes,
it does get darker. But then to your point, you're okay, now it's the end of the day. You go get into your, pajamas, maybe your comfies.
Oh,
Could
you
be
never
that
left
bad.
your pajamas.
Or maybe I did.
When you
See,
got up.
I do have jeans on.
That
I
was
am
good.
somewhat professional.
Okay.
But just
I
to
was nervous
make
there
sure
for a
that it's
second,
not too,
just to let you
I
know.
was going to say it's not too crazy, but yeah. And then you have your dinner, you unwind, and before you know it, you're like, okay, well, it's time to trot up to bed. So, but I was saying, like, we have an old schoolhouse. We have a lot of like wood burning fireplaces. So we'll go out a couple times a day to like, grab extra pieces of wood. And then because we do rescue the feral cats, because we were going to talk about that, I have like an outbuilding where I segregate the feral cats from my indoor cats. So, we truck out. So I do, Brad, get the fresh air and the
There you go.
vitamin D.
See, that's
so, yeah.
And that's good.
The other
Not
challenge.
as good though, Kris, on the activity.
Well, maybe you can start this week and take the cats out for a walk. Put a leash on them. Put them in the car.
Yeah, take your cat
Would
to the
you-
museum.
Okay, so would you judge me, Brad, if I said I already do that? And Kris, excellent idea. I will jot that down. Kris.
I would not judge you
No, I
because
wouldn't.
one, I already do because you're from Canada, so that just
Yeah.
supersedes any judging. Two,
Yeah.
I think it would be good that you do something like that. Three, up north, because of the cold, dark, and the wind, come 4:30, it feels like midnight. So I am
Yeah.
right there with you. Come that time, I feel like just going to bed because it feels like it's so late. And then the other point,
Yeah, and it's cold.
oh, it's miserable. That's why I'm here.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
But the cold came with me.
I was going to say though, I feel like there's a really clear boundary with the US and Canada in your mind,
It's
right?
called the
Like,
border.
but she's from Canada, so she's on the wrong side of the tracks. Well, but isn't it a time to unite? Like,
Are you saying you
we're
want to become a
neighbors.
state? Are you saying you want to be a
No,
state?
no.
Is this what you're saying?
I'm saying, why don't you come over to Canada? It's a little cold, but I think, come over this way.
She said unite.
I
I
heard
did
that.
say unite.
Not bringing politics
did.
into us. I am only
No.
giving you a hard time because I just like to, no offense to Canada, because people will probably be angry with me and Kris put me up to it. But I think you should take Minnesota and Wisconsin and we'll just call it even.
Okay. Really, like any special reason or just like as an olive branch?
Are you going to be at Directions?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. When we have the meal, Kris, we owe her a meal, by the way,
I
just to
eat.
let you know. And we'll hold her to it. And it will be part of our Canadian Thanksgiving that we're going to celebrate late. I'll give you the reasons why I think that those two states should become part of Canada. Or just
so I have to wait.
suspense.
The suspense.
You
Wow.
have 3 months.
Okay.
3 months to wait.
You
Wow,
can read up
okay.
on those states, and you'll probably figure it out.
I'll figure it out. So I have to actually come to the dinner and guess the reasons, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. See, now we've just
don't
made
be
it even
upset
more
if dinner
interesting.
is one of those little street carts.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm not picky.
I'm not saying
too
we're going to one of
bougie,
these,
you know?
we're not going to the Michelin restaurant out in Vegas for this repayment.
That's fair. That's fair. As long as it's not like a McDonald's, Streetcar though, like nothing. I was going to say street meat's fine, but let's edit that out.
No,
Kris, we can edit that out.
listen. No, we're not editing that out. We're not
I have
editing
no
that out.
filter and it gets me.
No, we have no filter. I will say though, food trucks. When I say a street cart, I mean like one of the food truck
Food trucks.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
Some of those are
They
absolutely
are.
amazing. Where I will seek them out, and sometimes some venues or some places will have, activities where they have multiple of those food trucks, and I love that. That's one of the things I like to do on the weekends. Or, for example,
Right.
is if you go to these little, I don't want to call them fairs because they're not really fairs, but they call them like
No,
those
but like
fairs.
a fest, right?
Yes,
like we have like a rib fest
some event
kind of
in
thing.
that
Festival.
event.
Yeah.
Whether it may be, we'll have some food trucks, and I love it because I like to eat. But
Yeah.
we didn't want to talk about the weather or your desire to become a U.S. citizen. Next time
There's no desire, to be fair. There isn't. I love Canada. I'm
Are you born
family
and
girl.
raised in Canada?
born and raised. Yeah.
No. Always in the Toronto area?
Yeah, primarily just about like an hour kind of. I actually live in like the Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo area, which is an hour from Toronto, but it's also an hour from Niagara where I live now. So I've always lived around here, but it's close to Buffalo. So, you know, when I'm feeling itchy, I can jump over the border. It's like a half an hour away.
Oh, that's not bad. So you get the taste of the U.S.
You're practically
Yeah,
American.
so sometimes practically,
US.
right? Yeah, dual citizenship. But I can like zip over and get things that you guys have that we don't, like food products, stuff like that.
Are you allowed
Get
to
a
take food over the
Powerball,
border?
which some food you can.
No fruits, right? Like limited in fruits.
Well, I know
like
coming
certain
into the
fruits.
U.S., you can't
There's
take
some
certain types of
restriction.
fruits. I understand why, because a lot of that is bugs. Like a lot of the invasive
Right.
species will come with foods. But I have, not to jump around, I do have so many questions for you because
Yeah.
of your expertise. But you live in an old schoolhouse. Do you have like chalkboards and stuff on the wall?
No, I don't, but not anymore. But I do live in an old schoolhouse, so it's an 1883. So
That must be awesome.
about it's like
Wow.
amazing. Like I love it. I love like just knowing that kids came here. People will stop by and say, you know, I used to the coal stove was here and I used to come in and I was the one that had to stoke the coal in the morning, or you know, I used to come here. There's names etched into the brick of the kids who used to come. Like
That's
I don't know.
that
Just
is-
for me,
I
I
love
love it.
history. I like
That's
history, and I love
amazing.
that nostalgic and historical. That's why I love Boston, because Boston has a lot of history, because it's the same type of thing. There's a lot of in New England. There's a lot of old buildings, you know, back from the 1600s, 1800s, and you're like, what fascinates me with that, and you have to really think about it. A lot of those buildings were made before tools, before electricity,
Right.
before lighting, and to see the construction of what they had put together, because they didn't have power tools and they didn't have a way to
Right.
whip up these blades to cut the wood, right? They had to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you really think what someone had to go through to build structures prior to the technology, right? What do they call that era?
Oh, for sure.
And their story too, like the people that you know put that
Yeah.
together, where they live,
I
what their life was like.
I love that stuff. Chris, we'll have to make a field trip.
It is. It's super cool.
Yeah,
You should,
I loved
if you're ever
it.
in the area, like come on by. But we've done like some renovations just to kind of bring it to modern like standards. Like we put a heat line and stuff. But when you take down some of the walls, like some of the beams, you can tell they're, to your point, all entirely different because they just found a beam that fit that space. So some are long, some are short, some are thick, some are thin. Whereas like now, you know, you just cut the beams to the size you need and everything kind of fits perfectly. In the insulation, there would be like newspaper or
yes,
just
and you
different
have
things. Because to
horsehair
your point, they
insulation,
just
I think they call it a horsehair plaster.
They're-
And
yeah. So they just used, to your point, like what they had,
What they
right,
had,
and
yeah.
what could work. Yeah. So it's been interesting to kind of do little projects here and there, and then see, like you said, like
Uncovering
how
stuff.
they uncovering things. Yeah. My husband is convinced that one day we'll take down a wall and find just like a load of cash that is just like some old person who like hid it and forgot. We have yet to find that, but other cool, interesting things we found.
I was just going to
You-
ask,
you
have
should-
you
you
found anything
document that.
interesting? I've been into old houses, old buildings, and you find some great stuff.
Yeah.
Like
Of how they
artifacts.
used to do things. I went to a place the other day. You know what I saw on the wall? They had an old can opener. Like the can opener
Yeah.
that's screwed into the wall and it kind of flapped out. I'm like, this is like back from the 1950s, 1940s. It's amazing.
It brings you back in time. It's
Yeah.
super cool.
It's great. And life was much easier then. I believe.
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
there were challenges. They had separate challenges. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we have modern medicine, we have some conveniences, but with those conveniences also comes more time, responsibility, you
Yeah.
know, focus and stuff.
It's like
before.
simpler times, I would call it,
Thank
right?
you.
Like things were what
Yep.
they were. You accepted what they were. You weren't like always chasing the next thing. There was like a certain appreciation, I think, for what you had. Whereas like now with technology and like social and stuff like that, I think people are always chasing something more. But I do find that like, you know, there was a woman actually, she came and she brought like all the pictures from when they converted it from a schoolhouse to a house and like just telling the stories and things like that. There was just like a lot of gratitude back then, you know.
They
It was
live
really
in the
cool.
moment,
Yes.
which is really
Mhm.
nice.
And I mean, there were It wasn't as much. I mean, they did have crime. They did have other things. I don't want to say it was a time when I'm going to the
It
next
wasn't
thing.
perfect.
It wasn't perfect,
Yeah.
but it was also very community. So you could go to your neighbor and say, "Hey, can you help me build
Everyone
a barn?"
knows each
Right?
other.
Everyone would have those barn raising parties.
Yeah.
Man, to
Yeah.
be able to go back and see, and I think,
Live in a small town. It's very similar. Like everybody knows my neighborhood.
living in a small town is
Blessings.
great,
As
Chris,
close as you can get.
and you live in a great area, and I would like to live in Chris's deck. Just live on his deck. I could live on his deck.
Oh,
Literally,
really?
you could live on his deck.
Oh, I want to see it.
We'll have to do tours after this recording.
We will. We'll do some house tours.
In the summer, though, because then it's kind of gloomy right now.
Yeah,
but
we don't want to go outside that long now.
No. But still, Chris, even in the area that the rural area that you live in, you still have like technology. You have the internet, and to
that's
Jen's
true.
point, everybody is. I do feel like everybody's always looking for the next best thing, and not appreciating what they have, and and then they realize they always want the next best thing because sometimes you already have the best thing. If you realize what I'm saying, and sometimes you have to take a step back and say it is the best thing. All right, but enough of this. I could talk about this all day long.
We're getting deep.
Me too.
We are. But before we jump into the conversation, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself outside of the feral cats in the schoolhouse and that you're from Canada?
Yeah, so basically I've been in manufacturing since like forever, like 20 years or so. And I started off just as basically, hey, here's a filing cabinet and here's drawings and we need you to put it into Excel because the company was taking an old DOS-based system and moving them to an ERP. So I just started basically that way. And then I learned about all the tables and how databases integrate and, just how things run together. And I just learned the system. I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid to play with it. So I became their in-house process improvement person. And then the company that I work for now, so I've been with Sabre for over 16 years, since 2008, they were actually the partner that was implementing for us. So when I left that company, they were like, hey, have you ever thought about consulting? So I've been doing consulting since 2008 in the manufacturing space on a different ERP system, one called Visual. And then we actually got into GP for a period of time. So we did manufacturing implementations in the GP space for a few years. And then we started looking at it and thinking, like, is GP really the right product for manufacturing? So kind of came to the conclusion that really, no, we should be in the NAV space. That's more the right product. So then we moved to NAV and then Business Central. So been doing that, like I said, since 2008, and just through the jigs and the reels over the last 16 years, I've worked my way to be the vice president of the ERP practice at Sabre. So the whole ERP implementation side of the business runs under my umbrella. So that's sort of my day-to-day.
Excellent.
It's a lot of responsibilities.
It's a lot of responsibility, and it's nice to see the progression. I like to hear the history of individuals that work within the community. Again, the community, it's large, but it's small. I feel like everybody knows everybody, or at least
I always say that.
And it's nice.
And what's interesting, I think, about me is that I've been with Sabre for so long. Like sometimes you find, like you said, it's a large space, but it's small because you see the same people. But you move around, you want to do different things and go to different places. But I've sort of been with Sabre for a really long time, but you get to know a lot of really great people. And that's why I love what you guys do, because it's so interesting to hear their different perspectives and different areas of expertise. And it grows so much. And it's such a good way to keep up with the features and, all the integrations and the ecosystem and everything that's going on. So it's like you said, it's super big. It's always changing, but it's tight knit. And I feel like it's very, like everyone always wants to help each other and share knowledge, which I think is cool.
It is. It's
really
amazing.
cool.
And with that, so I couldn't think of anybody better to ask than you.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So within Business Central, we have the manufacturing, I guess you call it module or manufacturing portion of it.
Yeah.
Right? Where somebody could produce product using production orders.
Right.
Also within Business Central, we have assembly orders.
Right.
And I often get asked, what's the difference between a production order and assembly order? When would I use a production order versus an assembly order? What are the differences between the two?
Right.
And the questions go on and on and on.
Right. So we get asked that a lot too, especially because we're in the manufacturing space. And a lot of the times, if they don't have a service component of their business, they're really trying to figure out, do I need the premium license or an essential license, right? Because that's one of the key differences between using production orders and assembly orders, is that assemblies are included with an essential license, whereas if you want the production orders, you need the premium license. So that's one of the key differences. So if you start with sort of how are they the same, they both are supported by MRP. So they both can be considered supply or demand. You can do multi-level assembly orders, multi-level production orders. You have the ability to obviously create bills of materials and add items to both. You can make to stock or make to order. Like, those things are the same. I would say some of the key differences would be, and these would be the questions that I would ask. How interested are you in capturing labor? Right? Like capacity planning, labor collection. Within an assembly order, you can add resources. Resources can be people or they can be machines, but you're really just going to backflush a standard at the end of it. On the production order side, you'd have the ability to say, well, I have a work center. In that work center, I have individual machines, and you want to look at the capacity between the work center group as a whole, as well as individual machines. You want to do things like capture setup time, run time, wait time, move time. You can't do that in an assembly. You can only do that in a production order. Like, I would ask them questions about the capacity planning side, like how do you need to see it, move things around? And we can get into each of these kind of in more detail as we go. But the second thing I would ask them is how real time that order needs to be. So with an assembly, you're really just, you have an assembly, you produce something. So your ability to status that and say this is in the queue versus actively being worked on, your ability to consume material before you've output a finished good, you need a production order for that. So you can kind of get like more realistic costs, I would say. And then my third consideration would be whether or not you subcontract. So if you send parts out for the routing or the labor to be produced by a vendor, production orders are better suited for that. So ideally, I would say an assembly is more for like a kit scenario. You really care about inventory control. And then production orders, you care more about capturing labor, the labor being real time, capacity planning. You're maybe dealing with scheduling concerns. It's more detailed on the routing side. Yeah.
That was a good, quick overview of production orders and assembly orders, and I think we can be done now.
Yeah, really. I mean, we're good.
That was perfect.
But let's go back to the cats. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, let's go back to the cats. On the, like, each of them though, there's differences too, right? So if you look at a bill of material, so for a kit or an assembly, you can't do what's called a phantom inside of an assembly. So that means that you have something that you have a bill of material for. It's a component inside of your BOM, but you never actually stock it or you never actually scrap it. So you actually don't need to create the item, but you want to have a bill of material associated so that you can blow out the demand. The ability to add a negative, like you can't do that.
See, I've heard that word before. So a phantom bill of material is a bill of material for an item that you don't produce, but it's just a collection of items that you can group for planning and inventory.
Right. So let's say you have a BOM and there's a component on that BOM, a bill of material.
We don't have bombs here.
So let's say...
I mean, we have bombs, bill of materials, but we don't have bombs.
I know. Let's use we got to use the full word. One time I was in a meeting, and because the Microsoft, you use these acronyms all the time, right?
Yes.
I kept saying ISV, and the guy said, "What is an ISV? Stop using it." So I had to be cognizant to use the full word, but a bill of material. So within a bill of material, you may have a component that you have like more components for. So think of it as like a multi-level bill of material, but you don't actually produce that component in the BOM. You have a bunch of raw material that you collect, you put together. But think about it when you build Lego, you immediately take that thing and you keep assembling it into its parent or whatever you're making for. So it would allow you to, in Business Central, you could create a production BOM for that item. You could list the components that you need for that item, meaning you could manage just one area if that BOM changes, bill of material changes. But then you never actually have to create an item card for it. You never need to output it and put it on hand and consume it. So your inventory control of that phantom level, you don't need it, but you can manage a BOM for it, bill of material.
I get it. So it's almost like you had mentioned, if I'm putting something together, I take all of the pieces. I have to first put these 3 things together before I can do the rest of it. Is that a good way to think of it? So I still have the
but
inventory.
You don't need to.
I don't need to create an item for it. I don't need to plan for it. I need to plan for the components. But as part of the process of building it, I need to build this thing maybe first, or build this thing with these pieces together, then take what is completed and then use that to continue building my product. Is that a good way to think of it?
That's right. But that's a good way to think of it. But you don't, like, my key thing is that once you take those components and you put them together, do you need to actually put it on a shelf for some period of time? Like, do you need to know that it's there, for an inventory valuation perspective, or just to consume it later or to scrap it? Like, if you take a bunch of components and you collect them, you put them together, but then you just immediately use that little weldment or subassembly to build something else, you just keep building it. So from a planning perspective, if you were to look at your bill of material, you might see a phantom line which has an ID, but when you actually ran your MRP or your material requirements, it would actually tell you just to purchase or produce the components.
Got it. Understood.
Right. So in an assembly, there's ISVs that will allow you to do that.
What's an
so
ISV?
Ben Cole. Oh, I know. Sorry. Independent software vendor.
We're going to get at that. No, I say that in jest, but it's true. When we have conversations with the acronyms, I do it myself.
I know.
It's assuming a level of understanding. And I was just on a call with somebody who was new to Business Central, and sometimes you forget after working with it for so long.
We do.
The terminology is quite different than what many expect. So it's almost like you have to have a language lesson when you first start in implementation, because this is what we mean.
There's people that don't even use VAR, or some people use VAR, and some people just say partner too.
Right.
So that's kind of changed.
Well, and it's good for you guys to do that, is to like reset the expectation to like, what are they calling it today? Right? Because to your point, Kris, it does change. So it's like, does that still mean the same thing that I thought it was yesterday? But yeah, so for the independent software vendors, they would be like the little apps that can plug in. So on the assembly side, there is apps like Ben Cole from ERP Connect has one called Advanced Assemblies.
I'm going to stop right there. I'm calling Ben after this, and I'm going to tell him that he needs to, like, Ben, you need to give us kickbacks or something, because we've had several episodes in a row now.
They have such great products.
Everybody's brought up Ben, and it's like, oh, Ben Cole has this, Ben has this. So I'm going to call Ben after this.
Yeah. He's like a little celebrity, I guess, in the ecosystem. But he does have things like the ability to do phantoms, the ability to do version control, which is something that production BOMs allow you to do, but you can't do them in assemblies. So sometimes you can look at, well, what are the key things that production needs that isn't in an assembly, and then just get a little independent software solution to be able to plug in. Or depending on how much of that, you might just need the whole premium module.
Okay, so I'm trying to keep track of the differences between, as you're speaking, the differences between production orders and assembly orders. So I just want to try to reset for a moment. First thing is licensing. So with Business Central licensing, a difference is you need the premium license if you want to use production orders and manufacturing. You just need the essential orders if you want to use assembly orders only. Right? So that's one of the first things. From a use case point of view, production orders have routings, and you can track capacity as well as labor time and labor, right?
So I would say that both have like the ability to track labor. Assemblies allow you to add resources, which a resource you would just say is a machine or a person, and then you can put a time to it. If you want on production orders, you can add either a work center or a machine center. So you can have that kind of big view or down to the machine level view.
Okay, so a work center would be a department potentially, right? So you may have a department for casting,
assembly,
right? Assembly or something.
Third party
welding,
too.
Or yes, welding. And then the machine centers would be welder 1, welder machine 2, welder machine 3 within that work center for welding.
You could do that, yeah. Or you could have a work center that's just, I set up a work center for every single machine that I have, and that's how I want to track it. But you can see you have flexibility there. You also have the ability to say, instead of just one overall resource time, which is what you would get on an assembly, on a production order, you could break out, this is the setup time for that step. This is the run time for that step. Here's the wait time, the move time. So it allows you to have a lot more detail in your routing. You can also do things like a fixed scrap quantity. So if you're in an environment where you say, well, I have a first piece inspection every time I run this, I need to produce an extra piece, you can associate that type of thing.
So production orders allow for scrap, assembly orders do not.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, resource time is really just like very basic. You want to get a little bit of labor cost in, but you're really not trying to analyze it or break it out into too much detail.
Okay. Understood. And then you also said manufacturing orders have subcontract capabilities or subcontractor capabilities, and assembly orders do not.
Yeah, so for the production side of things, I would say that you've got the subcontract worksheet, which is in the premium. It works with production orders. It's really designed for, I am sending out a specific routing step or work center to a vendor for outside work. So on an assembly, could I indicate that I've got a resource that is an outside service vendor? Sure. But collecting the actual cost from a linked purchase order back into assembly, I can't do that very well. If I were to have a production order, I can indicate that I've got a work center. That work center would have a vendor associated to it. So it's very clear to everybody that this is something that we don't do internally for labor. This is something a vendor does. And then you have, similar to the worksheets inside of Business Central, you have what's called a subcontract worksheet, where you can run that and it will calculate for you of all of your released production orders. So we'll get into this, but you can status production, right? Like, is it released versus is it just in the queue? But for every released production order, what do I need to send out to vendors? You create a purchase order. That purchase order is linked back to the work center and that production order. And then when you post that purchase invoice, that actual cost will go into the production order. So it allows you a lot more accurate costing for that subcontract service. So it's just a lot better designed for it, I would say.
So you had mentioned production orders can have status codes, so you can track the orders by where they are. And some of them, planned, firm planned, released, finished.
Yep.
What are they? There's another one, right?
I'm going to, let's do, he's always trying to test me, Kris. We should test him right now. No, I'm just
I'm not trying to test you. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of.
You were telling me earlier when I meet you in Vegas for dinner, I have to tell you, why you're giving me certain states. So I was just teasing with you. But the,
oh, I see where this is coming.
So on the assembly order
Kris,
side.
we're just deleting this episode.
Yeah, just throw it out.
Just for us
it's trapped.
this
is just for fun now. But the assembly orders, they're created and you output to say something's produced, which would consume the material, but then it's just finished once everything has been output. Once you've made everything you're supposed to make. So it kind of gets created and then it goes into a black hole. Now, with a production order, you can create a simulated production order, which is really just for like quoting, estimating, trying to figure out how costs would come. The planning worksheet can create you a planned production order, meaning that it's something that probably is needed, you're planning for it, but nobody's committed to it. Think of it maybe like that. Then you can do a firm planned production order, which I like to think of this as I've committed to making it, it's firmed up, I will make it for this quantity, this item, this date, but it's not actively being worked on. So it's like in the queue, if you will. Then you can release a firm planned production order or just start it as released. To me, that indicates I've released it to the shop floor. Somebody's working on it. So if I want to increase the quantity, if I want to change a material or a work center, I know I have to go and find it, figure out where it is, and maybe change paperwork and change it in my system. And then there's a finished status. So you've got a lot more statusing capability to be able to indicate, well, where, like, has this even been started?
Got it. And so a simulated production order is for costing. So if you wanted to put something together to make like a cost sheet, I've heard people say they wanted to do cost sheets, right? So is that what you would use a simulated order for?
Or quote?
Yeah, like maybe you're quoting a new product line and you want to add some items and some work centers to it to figure out what your material and labor cost would be, for the purposes of quoting, but you're not going to transact against it. You're not going to consume against it. You won't build against it. It's really just for the purposes of figuring out, like, potentially like what a cost could look like.
Okay. And then a planned and firm planned released orders are orders that you're working on or you will work on. And then
I would say released would be you're working on it.
Released is
finished
when you're
order, you're done.
Finished order is done. You mentioned material requirements. So I'm going to guess here. Simulated orders don't show up in your material requirements planning. Do planned and firm planned, or does a firm planned and a plan doesn't?
Yeah, so most often a planned order is created because you're running some kind of planning tool like the planning worksheet. So it will plan for you what you need depending on the item setup if you've included it to plan, but it can plan for you all the material down to your lowest level. So it can be your raw materials, it can be sub-assemblies, and so it will create basically a planned production order, let's say if it was produced item, all the way down, like I said, to your lowest level. And typically you've got like a planning tool that does that, like that you're running. And then a person will look at the planned orders from, say, an MRP, and then they will firm them up because they commit to that quantity, that date. They've validated that it truly makes sense, because a planning worksheet's just a suggestion, right? And I always say it's dumb and dutiful, so it shouldn't replace a human that actually looks at that and validates that that was a good suggestion. And then they would create that firm plan, which puts it into like the to-do queue so that the production team knows, okay, this is what you should actually be building.
Okay. And then released means it's released to the floor or released for work. Excellent.
Right. And
okay.
I mean, there's no hard rules in the system. Like, I know some people who say, well, as soon as we create the orders, we're running that production pretty quickly. So they might just create a released order right out of the gate. But the idea here, I think, on the production order side is you have a lot more flexibility in how you want to produce items, where you want to collect, when you consume, how you consume, if your consumption's related to output. Like, you have a lot more flexibility instead of it just being like it exists and it's done.
Perfect. Thank you. That explains the types. So there's 5 types of statuses for production orders. You also had mentioned we can do versioning of bill of materials in production orders.
Mm-hmm.
With assembly orders, we cannot do that. And then also we can have, say I wrote this down, phantom bill of materials. And you cannot have them in assembly orders. Can you have multiple levels in assembly orders?
You can. Yep. So you can have multi-level assembly orders. So if we look at, like, say, the master data, so if we want to look at differences, we could start kind of from the masters and work our way down. So a kit or an assembly, its bill of materials is created on the item card itself. So you would have one assembly BOM potentially for each of the items that you create. On the production order side, you would create a production BOM in the production BOM page. So it's sort of separate from the item card. You'd create the bill of material, and then you associate it back to an item or multiple items. So that's kind of a neat thing about production as well, is if you have an item and you say, all of these groups of items, they're built the exact same way. They have the exact same material. They have the exact same quantities that are required, and how I calculate those quantities required are the same. You could associate one bill of material to 50 items if you want, which means that you only have to maintain one bill of material if there's a change.
So the assembly items, assembled items have a bill of material unique to an item. And produced, I'm just using assembled because of assembly orders, my terminology here.
Yeah.
And produced good. Items, because you're using production bill of materials or production orders for them, don't have a bill of material associated with them. They don't have a unique bill of materials directly associated with them. They have a bill of material associated with them that's a group of items, but that bill of material can be shared. So a bill of material itself is its own entity that can be used as part of other items.
Right. So the bill of material is created separate from the item, and then you associate it back later. And it could be there's one bill of material for every item, or it could be there's one bill of material that, to your point, is shared between lots of items.
Got it.
Lots of differences. See,
there is.
No, it is interesting because I've heard that question asked several times, and I like to see, what the real answer is, right? So
and it's like a conversation, really, right? It's not an answer, because it becomes, well, how do you, and then you have to kind of strip back the onion, and then you're trying to find like features or functions that would say, ooh, that's going to put you into this bucket. So like another one as an example is on your bill of material, you have a quantity per. So basically what the system can do is calculate,
assembly bill of material? Okay, thank you.
So on both, you have to indicate for the component items, how much of that component item do you need to build one of the end item? On a production BOM, bill of material, you would have the ability to say, well, my calculation formula is take the quantity per that I've indicated, times it by the quantity that I need to produce, and then tell me that's the expected quantity. So if you had a bike and you need a front wheel, then you need one front wheel. If I'm making 10 bikes, I need 10 front wheels. You could, though, change your calculation formula on a production bill of material to say, well, I want it to calculate based on length. Therefore, you're going to put in a length dimension. Or you could say, I want it to calculate based on length times width. And therefore, you're going to plug in those fields, and it will calculate the expected quantity based on taking a length times a width. So there's a few different options there. You can do weight, you can do a fixed quantity. You don't have that functionality when you look at a assembly bill of material.
That's a big difference. So if somebody's a producer of something that's, I want a desk that's 4 feet by 6 feet, my materials would vary because I may also make a desk that's 3 feet by 5 feet. And
there's definitely different ways to do it, but when you're calculating your expected quantity, it's not always just, well, I've got so much of an item, and if I'm building 10 of them, I need 10 times that amount. Like, it's not always that cut and dry. So it's the most common one that I see people use it that way, but there is flexibility around that. So
you're saying, like, if you order 2 10-foot tables, and then you have to order the material of, let's say, they only come in 30 feet table. So you would somehow break it down how much you need to build those 2 tables, in a sense.
You like ultimately that's what like a bill of material would do is you're breaking out how much material do I need to build those two tables, and you can do it different ways. You could do it by calculating, like you said, different dimensions. You could do it by having just different unique items because maybe they come in those cut pieces already. You could have it with like an item and a variant, but when you start looking into that scenario, like you said, where it's like, I've got variation, it's not always the same. Sometimes you want to look more at like a production order because it doesn't close your door as quickly. Yeah. Yeah, so we talked about like if you think about master records, you can copy BOMs, production, bills of materials and routings. You can't do that on assemblies. You can do version control, like we spoke about. You've got, I'm trying to think of like other main ones. The other thing on a production bill of material is you could add a negative quantity. So when it's calculating what materials are needed and it's coming up with your production order component list, let's say you're in an industry where you have some scrap recovery. Like we've dealt with customers where they say, well, I've got a certain material that is left over and I can actually turn around and sell that back and get a profit for it. So when they produce something, they need to be able to capture that scrap recovery. So on a production bill of material, you're typically indicating the items that you want to consume, which is when you post it, it's going to decrease your inventory. But you can add a negative quantity to a production bill of material so that when you post, your consumption of it, it would actually increase an on-hand value or quantity.
So it's like a byproduct, maybe.
Yes, that's
Okay.
like a common term for it. But like
Yeah, I'm just
basically you're
trying to-
saying that like you've got material coming back and increasing. So like I said, the most common one that I do see is that like sort of scrap recovery on an assembly.
Like cable, like a cable where like you use a certain amount of cable and it's like, I didn't need all of that to have scrap. You can resell some of those cable. Is that a
Cable
good example?
you'd probably just buy in like a roll, and then on the actual order you would just indicate the inches or the feet that you actually need. So you would only put in what you expect to use. This would be like if you're expecting to get a product back that might be different. So like in the scenario you're using of the cable, it's all one part, right? Like it's just how much of that one part did I use? In the case that I'm using, I'm indicating I'm making this part, I'm consuming these raw materials, but I'm also going to get, and Brad, you kind of mentioned it, like I'm going to get this other product that's going to increase my on hand that I might sell or I might use to consume in another part. So it would have unique part IDs, what I think is the key difference than what you're talking about.
So it's a different item that you're getting back. And it's not a component item, nor is it the finished item. It's another item that's a byproduct of putting all of those together and falling off, I guess you could say. So you put all this together and there's something left over, and that something left over is not those components. It's something different. And then that's
it's something that you can do something with. You can sell it back to, get some revenue from that because it's a high value product or things like that. So that's what I mean by that. Yeah.
Okay. Another one that I've heard conversation on, what about you mentioning scrap tracking, and you can do scrap with production orders, not assembly orders. What about loss? Is that the same as scrap, or is loss different?
Yeah, like I think that's the same. I don't know in the context that you're thinking of it, but like, yeah, you would indicate. The other thing I think to kind of maybe what you're talking about, maybe not, but the ability to be more specific in what you're consuming. So for example, on an assembly order, you have an expected quantity that you need to consume. So if you want to consume a little bit less than you're expected, that's very easy. You can consume less, you can have a little bit left over and just clear that out and close your production order. If you wanted to say, oh, I used more, like I used this product, then I realized, oh crap, that's not really what I want, and I had to use a little bit more. Or maybe I was training, so I used a little bit more, and I'm okay to have that cost go into the cost of the production order. Over consuming your expected quantity is I'll just say a lot easier in a production order. Because if my expected quantity was 10, and I want to use the production journal or the consumption journal to say I consumed 11, the system lets 11 be the number and you post it and it decreases 11. If I have a assembly order and I list that I expect to use 10 and I enter 11, I get an error. So now potentially I have to play with that quantity per that calculated my expected quantity and have it come up with making sure that my expected quantity is 11. Like it's not easy, right? I can't just easily go in and say, I didn't use 10, I used 12 and post it. So that's what we say on the production order side. It allows you to be a little bit more detailed and accurate and like real time with what really happened. Whereas I would say on an assembly, you're more looking to just backflush the expected items, the expected resource time, and indicate that you made something. Like you're not as interested in the exact resource time or maybe even material because it's just standard all the time and doesn't change very much, or it's just not important.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just like liquid, right? I think liquid was I was on a project once and I just didn't quite understand how you would capture overflow and loss and liquid stuff.
That's what I was thinking. This guy worked with someone who worked with precious metals, and they had gold, and so they made something with gold,
Right.
And then the gold would expect. I'll just keep it simple. Do you use ounces up there?
Yeah, we use
Okay.
use ounces.
Well, that's a serious
Y'all
question.
use ounces up there.
No, that is a serious question because in Canada,
No, I know, because the imperial metric thing is
yes,
always
the imperial versus
yeah.
metric. But in Canada, what I've
Right.
learned is they use the imperial sometime and the metric sometimes, but sometimes for the same thing.
Yeah, we're
Because there's certain things they
flexible,
use inches
we're
and feet
friendly.
for, and there's certain things they use
Y'all
meters
friendly.
for. So they're trying to they're trying to satisfy both systems, so they kind of straddle the fence.
We're people pleasers up here. That's right.
But no, they were talking about where they had something that may use an ounce of gold, and they want to recover the scrap, obviously, because gold is precious and has a lot of
Right.
value. So I need to give you 1 ounce to produce something that may use 0.75 ounces. The scrap right there should be 0.25 ounces, but in the manufacturing process, they may lose 0.02 ounces due to, if you're cutting or something, you're going to have a slight loss. That's where I was coming up with being able to see, I'm trying to learn some things here of how we can
and
implement.
scrap too is good if you know that you're always going to get some scrap. Like you always know that it's going to be 2%, 5%, 10% more. On the production BOM, you can indicate a scrap percent. So if you're using something like a planning worksheet or an automated system, it will calculate that you need to buy a little bit more or make a little bit more. But then when you actually go to do the consumption, it'll account for that. And it will even break it out sometimes in the entries when you go and look at it. So you'll be able to see this much was good material, this much was scrap material. So yeah, there's different like levels of detail for sure on that. Yeah, I'm trying to think of another one that would be different on the assemblies.
Well, the assembly orders, I know on the item card, I've seen replenishment systems. Is it assembled? Is it produced? I've seen assembled to order. Is that play into this at all?
So on a assembly so you can have both of them auto reserve to like sales orders as an example. So you can do an assemble to order or assemble to stock. So when you do an assemble to order, that would essentially mean that as soon as you put a quantity on a sales order, it's going to automatically create a kit item or an assembly order. The key thing with that is that when you see that assembly order, you aren't able to post that assembly quantity and put it into inventory. You essentially, when you ship it, it's going to automatically post the output of the assembly order and use that for the shipment. So that's something that's you want to be careful of, right? Because you might say, but I do want to stock it. Even though it's for this order, I want to stock it and I move it around my warehouse. So in that case, and you can do this on both, you could create an assembly order or a production order that's just for stock, for inventory. So it's not tied to an order, but you could reserve it manually to an order. which would allow you to be able to output both. You could put it on hand, you could move it around your warehouse. That functionality would be available in both.
So the assemble to order option with an assembly order, when you put an item on the sales line with a quantity, it automatically creates an assembly order for that quantity, which at that point just becomes a document because it doesn't get produced. I'll use the word produced, or the output doesn't happen.
Transacted.
Yes, thank you. I'll use that from going forward. It doesn't get transacted. Thank you. It doesn't get transacted until you ship the order. And then it automatically posts the assembly order, increasing the inventory, then shipping.
Decreasing the components.
Yes, decreasing the components, thank you. Increasing the output of the assembled item, and then shipping it. So that's not really something that's meant to be tracked, because how would you put it through the system? It's something that maybe when they're shipping it, they kit it. So
So
I'm just trying to think of
like
a use case for that to get a better understanding of when.
Yeah, and that could be like a kit scenario, right? Like I've got these kit items, as I only kit them together when somebody orders them. So when somebody orders them, you want to be able, and again, this drives back to like I need the inventory control of the components, and that's what you really care about. But you don't really care about the labor because it's such a quick process, and the labor time might be like very small. So an order comes in, they need 10 of these kits. Somebody goes, they pick the components, they put them together, put them in a bag, put them in whatever, they ship them out. So by the time somebody gets that order, picks those parts and ships it, it's so quick that I don't need to consume in one step, output in one step, see it on the shelf, then use it for shipping. It's just too many transactions. It's too many touches. It doesn't run over a long enough period of time to justify all those transactions, which answers or dovetails into like what you were talking about, like when would you use one, right? You would use a production order if you tend to start something and it's produced over like a few weeks or even a few months. And with a production order, you would have the ability to be able to consume inventory without outputting a finished good. You would have the ability to tie a certain operation step to material components using what's called a routing link code, where you could say, well, without outputting and saying I finished the end product, I finished it at this operation. Let's say it's the saw cutting operation. So I want to consume these materials because at that point, they're in my WIP. I no longer have them on my shelf. And then maybe you've got more items that are listed on your bill of material. And you could consume those just at the end when you produce them or through another operation.
So with a production order, you can have components consumed as they go through the routing at certain steps, because that's where you expect the consumption to occur, because it is, maybe have a routing step of assembly. So assembly is going to take X components and then it's going to automatically consume those. Where an assembly order, it does it whenever
it's basically when you say you're finished the end part
item,
it
then it
will
takes all the
consume whatever you have in your consumption quantity, like whatever you've indicated there. So basically on the operation, the work center or machine center, and the material, you have something called a flushing method. So your flushing method, to your point, Brad, will indicate when do I want to consume material. And you don't have this capability with an assembly order. So if you've got manual, which means that somebody will manually go in at some point, they will use what's called the consumption journal or the production journal to enter in the date, the item, the quantity. Both support lot and serial tracking. And they'll indicate, I want to consume this specific component on this specific order. Nothing to do with what was produced, nothing to do with operation. You can do what's called a forward flush, which means we talked earlier about the status codes. As soon as somebody changes the status from firm plan to released, it would then consume any forward flush material. So at that point, whatever the expected quantity is, it will decrease that inventory and it will issue that cost. You could do backward, which means that you are going to, when the status changes from released to finished, it will automatically consume at that point. You can also use backward with a routing link. So the key difference there is that when you have just backward turned on, it means that it's tied to the status of the production order as a whole. With a routing link, you're going to associate on this operation step, you'd have the same routing link on your bill of material items, and it will say, when you finish this operation, that's when I want you to consume the inventory. So it could be all at the end or during the process. You can also do the same forward and backward associated to picks. So you can see there, you've got a lot more, I call it like real time. It's not like when it actually happens, but it's like close enough. But it's more throughout the process over a couple of weeks or a couple of months. You're in stages and steps consuming inventory, and stages and steps you're outputting production
You tied to a step
capacity,
in process.
time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can have manual flushing, backward with routing link codes flushing, and forward flushing. And those all determine when the components get consumed and put into your working process.
Mm-hmm.
So for your inventory evaluation or your component tracking, you have a better control of your inventory, whereas an assembly order is, I post it, it's done, that's it.
Right. So if
Perfect.
you have like a bunch of assemblies and you say, well, I start them, but then they're not done for a month, it's going to be an entire month before any of that inventory component is going to be consumed. So if you're doing like MRP planning, which it really does rely on a good, accurate on-hand quantity, that's too long. You can't wait an entire month after you've done something or used product to tell your system that it's been used. So with these flushing methods, it allows you to be able to consume inventory more around the time that you're actually using it. And you can do the same thing with, like I said, labor time. So you could say, well, certain operations, I want to capture actual time. So someone's going to indicate, this is when I started, this is when I finished. Or there might be certain operations where you're like, meh, that's just inspection. It's always a half an hour. I want a little bit of cost tracked, but I really don't need anybody to clock in and be that accurate. If it's 28 minutes or 35 minutes, I don't care. Then you can also put a flushing method on your work center.
Excellent. One thing I was thinking of as you were talking about this, and you were talking about assembly or production or producing, does it, in Business Central, is there a way to do disassembly? So what happens if we produce a product that goes on our shelf and we either want to break it down because those components can be used in other products, or if a customer returns a product, is there a way, there may be some value in the components that are part of that product to reproduce something, or if there's a defective output. So again, same thing, we're making a desk. We'll go back to the example that Kris was talking about earlier. We're making a desk and we realize, the desk may have a top and it may have legs and it may have little rubber feet, but it gets produced and there's damage to the top.
Right.
But we want to salvage the legs and the rubber feet because they're still intact, and the way that they're fastened, we can, in essence, unscrew them and then use them elsewhere, or for another desk.
Yeah. So again, you've got like flexibility on that with the production order side, because when you do the output, you can indicate a good output quantity. That's what I made. That's good, usable, on hand. I can use it to ship. And then you can indicate a scrap quantity. And then in places like the output journal, you can actually have it calculate for you what the, in the consumption journal, what it should consumed as an expected quantity based on what was expected, which wouldn't include the scrap. Or you can have it calculate if you've already done the output and you've indicated that there was some scrap, and it will actually calculate a little bit more to consume, because it will look and say, well, I assume that if you made 10 and 2 were bad, you needed enough components to make 12. But then you can go through those consumption journal lines, and maybe to your point, you can salvage some of them. So you could change the quantities. Like those things would be a lot easier to manage in a production order. On an assembly, like I said, you've kind of just made it or not. and you can't really go back after easily and say, oh, I want to add inventory back, or I want to change what I consumed for just a component, for just an assembly item. Like some of these things you can do, but they're just clunky and they're a workaround, if you will, right? Like you're kind of manipulating it to make it work.
I can add numbers together on a piece of paper, or I could use a calculator. The calculator is much easier than a piece of paper. So I understand that what we're talking about, you can get things to work, but the more efficient way.
It's more designed for it. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. Wow, I'm learning a lot about production orders and assembly orders.
Same.
This is good. That's the goal. I have done a couple presentations on it. That's why it is a good topic, because a lot of people do ask about it because they don't know which one to use. And I mean, I always say this, like the more you want to do inside the system, probably the more pages you have to set up and maintain, the more transactions maybe you have to do. So you do want to justify, like, what data am I capturing? Like sometimes you look at things, you're like, that'd be great. But if you're not doing it now, like a common example of that would be capacity planning, right? People are like, oh, I want production orders because, down the line, I really want to be able to schedule and capacity plan and see what's loaded to work centers and individual machine centers. But if they're not experiencing bottlenecks, or they're not experiencing things where they go to produce something and they can't because they've got machine breakdowns, like maybe you just start with assemblies and then down the line you move to production orders when you do find that you have set up and run times and you're actually going to use them and they're accurate and people do need to collect actual labor. Like you could always move to it. And one of the things I always say about assemblies and production, with configuration worksheets and like being able to import and export data, the structure of, let's say, an assembly BOM and a production BOM is very similar. So if you exported all your assembly BOMs, and then you could pretty easily paste that into a production BOM template and then just upload everything, what you're going to find is just your production BOM template has a lot more fields, right? Like your calculation formula fields, or it has length, width, weight, those things because you need them. So sometimes it can be easier to start with assemblies if you don't need subcontract, if you don't need advanced capacity planning, and then later down the line, increase your license to a premium and just, I'll call it migrate. You'd have to massage your data a little bit, but just migrate your assemblies over and then create the routings that you need, which again, if you've got resources, is pretty easy.
No, that's a good,
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
No, that's a good thing to look at, because I like what you had mentioned, and it goes back to something we spoke about when you were on with us towards the end of last year. Really understanding the differences between the two can help your implementation, because there's a cost difference between the premium and the essentials license at this point. And the other key point that you had mentioned was the setup. Assembly orders are easier to set up and process than production orders. When I say easier, there's less to do. So it's if your
less to do, yeah.
If so your business doesn't need all of that,
there's a cost to setting it up.
Yes, if your business doesn't need all of that detail, then assembly orders may be perfect. Where production orders, you can do the same thing in essence, but it has a lot more detail, which may not be relevant to you. And I do like the point that you had mentioned. You can start off with assembly orders and then move to production orders relatively easy with configuration packages. So even if today you start off with assembly orders, you can grow into, I guess, is grow the right word, or progress?
No, I would say that, like,
your
progress, grow.
Yeah, as your business evolves and you realize, now I need the additional information, I can move over to production orders. Or if there's not some clarity on which may be the best to fit for whatever reason, right? I'm not saying that if everybody understands the differences, and an organization moving to use assembly orders, so production orders, or even just a business central may not understand which is better. They could start with assembly orders, see if it meets their requirements or their needs, and then easily move over to production orders without having to pay for all that licensing and set up front to find out they have to automate a lot of steps or do something that would have been done with assembly orders.
Well, I was just going to say, like, one of the things I always kind of keep in the back of my mind as I'm implementing is you want people to prove they need something, right? So, like, to your point, you want to start simple and then prove that you need production, like prove that you need more. So you start with assemblies where you can add items, you can add some resource time, you can add quantities that you need, you can do multi-level bills of material, you can associate them to items, you can build them to stock and production. You build that, and then somebody's like, but I really need to see my setup time and my run time. Or, but I really need to capture that saw cutting is done, but this next operation is not done. Then you start to realize, oh, okay, maybe assemblies are too simple. And then again, migrating that over. It's just not it's not like it's no work, but it's very much transferable.
It may be easier to transfer it than to set it up. It's easier to transfer assembly orders if you need production orders than to set up production orders and not need them. Maybe.
Yeah.
Does my logic sound?
Yeah.
Sound.
Speaking of sound.
No, I think to your point earlier, just want to make sure that, when you do evolve, that there is a cost to set up and there is also a cost to maintain it as well.
Can you hear people laughing or talking?
That was me. I hit that by mistake.
I was like, okay, because I was like, Kris, everyone's excited for what you're saying.
Yeah,
they're laughing at me.
Yeah, they were laughing at us.
There you go.
Yeah.
But
we brought this back.
I think the thing is, too, is that
hold on.
I love that.
Well, we have a soundboard, and when we first switched to using this platform, I was using it all the time. If you go back to some of the episodes, I used to do the door knock and I used to. This is what we used to do before we would let somebody in. I can't even see. This is my eyes. Like, I really need to figure this out. But we would do. You don't remember that?
You should do that when you have a special guest coming through. Like,
we have done that too.
No, we have done that. So you have the door knocking.
Surprise guest.
So we do this, right?
I like it.
Kris, who's at the door?
Yeah, I don't know. Who did we invite this time?
Let me see. I'm going to walk over and see.
Oh. This is wild.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, look who it is. It's Jenn, all the way from the north. Welcome.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for having me. Take a bow.
And it didn't play out really well because we start doing videos. And it's like, oh, they're not really walking.
Yeah, then people are like trying to compute what they're seeing and hearing.
Yeah. Do you have a joke for us?
Oh gosh, I do love jokes, but A, they're dirty, and B, on the spot. Like what are you? Because you love like the Canada-US thing. So if you're Canadian when you go into the washroom, and you're Canadian when you come out of the washroom, what are you while you're in the washroom?
What?
European. See, it's a little dirty.
See, that's what I wanted to do a joke for. That was good. That was really good. That I wouldn't classify that as a dirty joke, just to let you know.
It's a little dirty. It's potty joke.
It's a
the
potty
definition.
joke, and it's dirty
Canadian
because it's potty,
dirty.
but it's not what Americans call dirty. And maybe what you Canadians...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a Canadian dirty.
I forget
I'm
the
a lady,
Canadians are a
that's
little
why.
more sensitive. So...
Right. Yeah, sure. Sometimes.
Wow, I hope I never go to Canada. I probably will never get out.
I'm steering you off wanting to come to Canada. That's horrible.
No.
No, they'll stop you at the border unless they become the 51st state.
I will say, no. I say all this in jest, and I think anybody who knows me knows that I like to have a lot of fun and a sense of humor.
Yes, I appreciate that.
And that's what I say it for. I have no distaste for Canada at all. I have gone to Canada before, by the way.
Where'd you go?
Montreal.
Oh, I love Montreal. That's a great place to go.
But I had only gone to Montreal when I first started consulting because we had an implementation in Montreal. So that was, when did I start doing this? Back before I think both you and Kris were born.
Oh, come on. Look, that means it's working.
We were probably in high school.
I've been doing this since 1998.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I
So
don't know.
I was born, yes.
You just weren't
So
implementing Business Central.
I wasn't yet, not thinking about it, but where did you get time to actually tour around and see it? Because I know sometimes we don't spend a lot of time actually touring the place that we go when we're consulting.
Right there on its own is a whole separate conversation of how.
I know
listen, it's 2025,
evolved.
and the need to go on site has changed because fortunately
100%.
technology is at the point where with video conferencing, screen sharing, and internet connectivity, you can get a lot of things done remotely. Sometimes you may need to go on site. And it is also beneficial to go on site sometimes even at least once through an implementation because the individuals doing the consultation at least can visualize properly the layout of an the layout of what they're talking about. So if I'm, we're talking about manufacturing or producing product, if I can visualize what somebody's doing, then when we're having conversations, one, it helps me understand what they're talking about because I can physically see what they're doing. And the big thing that I've learned going through, because I've started off conversations, then I've gone site after we started, I understood more what they were talking about with some challenges based upon what they had in their environment. Whereas when you're just talking to somebody, you may say, it's not that difficult, but then you actually look and you physically see.
Easy.
Exactly. And then you realize now, I remember distinctly saying to someone, I completely understand what you were saying, why that was impossible.
Right.
It was impossible physically. It wasn't impossible systemically. And that's some of the challenges being a consultant. If you get to physically see is beneficial, but you don't necessarily need to sit there and say, okay, well, now I'm going to train you and show you how to do a production order. You can do some of that stuff.
Well, that's such an interesting thing too, is what do you need in your ERP versus what's physically happening on the shop floor? And then two, depending on what your shop floor looks like or how things are structured or laid out, sometimes it's you could put that into your ERP, but really based on the proximity or based on other factors, you just don't really need it. I find the other thing too is that when you go on site, now we do a lot remotely, but we have kind of debated, are there key times where we really should go and do during kickoff or during a pilot, just to, like you said, collect what I will call the oxygen stuff, right? So when you are talking and you're like, hey, what do you do? What's your process? They explain it and they try their best to think of everything. But let's say you go on site and you're like, I always say to people, pretend like you won the lottery, you're moving to Fiji, and I'm your replacement. I'm just going to sit here and watch what you do, and I'm just going to ask questions as I go. Well, they'll do things, and they'll be explaining as they go, well, I enter this, and I do that. Well, then they'll do a series of stuff they don't talk about. And because to them, it's well, obviously I do that, right? That's so obvious. But it's for me, I've been doing consulting for, a long time, over 16 years. So it's that's not super obvious. That's actually kind of different what you're doing there. I need you to explain a little bit better. Are you doing that because a customer asked you? Is that a business rule?
Exactly.
Is it just because that's what somebody showed you and that's how you've always done it? So when you see it, it just asks different questions in your mind, right?
You hit that perfectly. I will go back to why we got that, but it even goes back with even acronyms, because we were doing that ourselves with some of the conversation, making the assumption everybody can fill in the blanks and know what a BOM is instead of it being BOM, bill of material, or like we talked about the ISV. So that on-site sometimes can be helpful. And what I've found also, again, with technology, with the video conferencing, and I promote video with everybody, because if I'm talking with you, I can take a look at your reaction, right? The first part is to see if one of you paying attention, right? Or do you have the look on your face of, I really don't understand what this person is saying or doing. And as you had said, it goes back with the being able to physically see what someone's doing. You can pick up a lot more detail. So there is value to it. Is there value to be there all the time? It's debatable. But to go back to what you're saying, that's what I had said earlier on, because I started working with this before the internet, as they say. Right? We used to have to use dial-up and PC Anywhere with a remote control. The internet wasn't what it. The internet's been around obviously longer, but it wasn't mainstream for businesses and for remote connectivity and teleconferencing. It was, if you had it, was quite costly. But I used to tell everybody, I've been everywhere, but I've been nowhere, right? Because when I first started, I would go to New York almost weekly on the train.
Right.
And here we are all these years later, and I can tell you I've never been to the Empire State Building. I've walked by it 3,000 times, but you
never gone.
You never took the moment.
You never take the moment because you as a consultant, you get on the train, you go to a place, you go to the office, you eat lunch, you get out of the office. Usually you work late to maximize how much you can get out of your trip. You go to dinner, you go back to the room. You have to catch up on the stuff that you may have missed while you were gone, emails and stuff like that. Emails. Then you go to bed, you wake up, you're tired because you had a long day. Right? You may have to do a few emails or something before you go into the office. You eat breakfast, you go into the office, you have lunch, go back, repeat again. Next day, repeat, get back, get on a plane, train, automobile, go home. So you don't, a lot of times individuals don't take the opportunity to see anything other than a method of transportation, a hotel, and an office.
Well, you take advantage of that in conferences now, right? Like, to me,
I do that now with conferences.
Yep.
I try to get out as much as I can. Again, it depends on where the conference is, how easy it is to get out, and what the schedule is. Like, we just went to San Antonio, and Jen avoided us, but
no, I did not.
I went to go the river walk and all that other, the other type things that were close by. So I was able to at least say I walked the river walk. I was able to see it. I did the little boat tours to see the history. I love that.
I know,
that stuff right there is great for me. The history. That
I love
to
that
me,
too.
Anywhere you go, like I was up in Boston and I had someone come visit, and I had never done it. This was many years ago, but they had like the duck tours. And I did it in Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and I also did it in Boston. And I knew a lot of history about Boston, and I even learned a lot of history while I was on the duck tours.
You always do, yeah.
They're driving around, because you talk about some of the uniqueness of the buildings and stuff. So anywhere I go now, I want to try to do one of those, what I call, Kris and I talked about this too, the historical type events.
The best.
And that's
like
what
a walking
I see. Anyone who's doing conferences, include those. I mean, they did with San Antonio, but include those historical type things. I mean, it was even great going to the Alamo, just as it's just
same. I totally agree. Like, so back, like you said, like we used to always go, and to your point, you're tired trying to maximize the visit. But I recently, it's funny you guys say that, because I did the same thing where I started to say, I'm going to tack on an extra day, come in a day early or stay a day or two extra to see the city that I'm in. And it was the same thing. And with San Antonio, it was amazing because like I had a morning, I did the river walk, I read a book, I had a coffee, and I'm like, this is amazing. Like, saw the Alamo, was able to see it, and making it part of the trip so that you actually see it, because you don't know necessarily if you're ever going to be back there, right? And one of the things I'm a big fan of that I love, and I've loved it forever, is the hop on, hop off bus tour. So I love those for your purpose, Brad, where you have the history. So basically it'll be like a double-decker bus, and you pay, and they'll take you all around the city, and usually there's different routes. But throughout the bus tour, you've got headphones in nowadays. Before, it used to be somebody on a microphone, and they're like, here you are in Manhattan where the average rent is blah, 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 blah. And here you are. And you can, if there's somewhere you want to see, like the Empire State Building or the Statue of Liberty or whatever, you can get off, walk around, explore it, and then there's little pickup points where it'll pick you back up, and you just keep going around. But what I have found is that like you can do the same route like 3 times, and you can learn something new every single time, because maybe you have a different instructor, or they just can't tell you everything about every building in like 3 minutes that you're driving by. So you always learn so much. And that's why I love those walking tours or bus tours for that purpose.
I agree with you. I like
the Go ahead, Brad.
I like
poor Kris. It's hard for him to get a word in with me and Brad.
It's okay.
Isn't it? He's like,
that's all
I'm
good.
used to it.
You saying I talk too much?
I'm bad too. I love people.
All right, Kris, we'll give you the moment.
No, it's all good.
No.
Continue.
No, you speak. Now you're on.
No, you guys are having a very Canadian moment. Like, no, you go. No, you go. No, you go.
It's just a repeat. It's all good. Continue.
With the technology today, I also appreciate the self-guided as well. Like you're talking about with the buses, because I have done some self-guided tours here. And they have the points where you go through and you play and you have a narrator, so you can go at your own pace. But there's some attractions I spend more time at, because I like to see. Yeah. I did the Edison and Ford Estates tour, which was self-guided, and that's what it was. Is you went to certain points and they said, okay, now play point number 1. but some of it had so much for you to take in visibly, right? That if you were to hear what the narrator was saying about the history of the location or the point of the tour where you were on, you would have missed a lot of the intricate details, like when you're looking in the house and you're seeing just the old beds and stuff like that. It was just, I don't know. We're just digressing. And
I know. We're having too much
I feel like
fun.
I shouldn't talk anymore.
No.
I'm just kidding.
No.
It's just we're having a moment. Well, Mrs. Jenn.
Yes, thanks for... Yes.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. We do appreciate your time. We do appreciate your support. We do appreciate you also sharing the information about production orders versus assembly orders with us. Hopefully, it cleared some questions for any that may have questions, or even taught everybody something new about it as well. I know I have a better understanding of production orders and assembly orders, and have a good idea of which questions to ask when trying to determine which to use, and the benefits of each of them. If anyone has any additional questions or needs additional assistance with the Business Central implementation or manufacturing portion of the implementation, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
So they can go to saberlimited.com. All my contact information's on there. I'm on LinkedIn, just Jenn Claridge. So I think you guys have a bio now of the speakers, which is great. So my LinkedIn connection is up there. Those would probably be the two best ways. And then my email is just Jenn, JENNC @saberlimited.com. And I love sharing my knowledge. Like I said, I've done this presentation at a few of the different conferences because people really did seem interested in the topic. And I think it was helpful to kind of see. So if anybody even wants like a PowerPoint sort of this, where I actually do like a walkthrough of creating the exact same order through as an assembly and through as a production order. I love to just kind of like help people and just share my knowledge. So if you wanted to reach out and just get more information, like I said, people have been very generous to help me understand concepts better, and I'm happy to do that for others as well.
No, I appreciate that. And I do think that sounds interesting to have a comparison of setting up an item in assembly order and setting up an item in a bill of material and processing. That is a great way to see it. And like you, Kris and I feel the same way. We share a lot of information because of that. I mean, some people have always shared for me, and it's almost at the point where it's time to give back. Speaking of your presentations, will you be going anywhere soon for presenting? Any conferences, user groups, or anything?
So there's a user group in February for the Dynamic Communities user group. I know we've put in the call for speakers. I usually speak at DynamicsCon, Summit, Directions. I have the last couple years anyway, so I've submitted. I haven't yet heard back. I don't think that they've selected the speakers, but I'll be at most of the same conferences that you guys probably will be. So
in February, which user group are you going to?
I think it's just a virtual, you know how they have the Dynamics community monthly virtual user groups that everyone can connect to. So I offered to do one on data decisions. So I'm going to talk about just like different ways to be able to use the data in your system to analyze like errors and troubleshoot and fix data. There's a lot of different like configuration worksheets and edit in Excel and packages and what are the differences. So
very cool.
Yeah, so
I think that's great.
Wherever I can. So if you guys have ideas too on things, I was thinking about starting up a little like blog or YouTube channel of just things, because I find there's like these quick little hitter things where people are like, yeah, I don't know, I'm thinking about it. So if you guys, have any ideas, but just the idea of like quick little hitter things on things where it's like, I just want to see it. I love to share my knowledge in any way that I can. So
you can probably do it in smaller pieces and like
smaller
YouTube
pieces
shorts
are good.
or
We'll talk with you after, not today, but I will follow up with a conversation with you on that. I have been thinking,
over dinner in Vegas.
Well, no, before that, because I've been working on putting something together for that portion of it. And that user group meeting that you're talking about, the virtual user group meeting, is February 20th at I think it's 1300 Eastern time.
I believe so. Yeah.
So
usually
I know I shared it the other day, and you had it as well. And if you're presenting there, I know I already elected to attend that, so I have that on my calendar as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing your presentation. And other than that, I think I'll see you in Vegas. Hopefully we all can make it there.
That'd be great.
Age. Yeah, it would be great, and we can get you the food truck meal that we promised you.
That would be awesome.
Other than that, Happy New Year. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to talking with you again soon. Ciao, ciao.
Yes,
Later,
you
Jenn.
too. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Kris, for your time for another episode of In the Dynamics Corner Chair. And thank you to our guests for participating.
Thank you, Brad, for your time. It is a wonderful episode of Dynamics Corner Chair. I would also like to thank our guests for joining us. Thank you for all of our listeners tuning in as well. You can find Brad at developerlife.com. That is DVLPRLIFE.com. And you can interact with them via Twitter, DVLPRLIFE. You can also find me at matalino.io, MATALINO.io. And my Twitter handle is Matalino16. And you can see those links down below in the show notes. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, and take care.